So in this video, I'm going to show you a little bit about working with shapes in Adobe Photoshop. And when you're done, you'll be able to make a drawing like this one I've made here using mostly shapes. I used the tree builder and copied in a couple of photographs, but most of it was just using shapes and filling them with either solid colors, gradients, or patterns, and then putting some layer blending modes on them. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is just to learn how to create a solid rectangle. So we're going to start off easy. So what you'll be using the shape tool, which is right here on your toolbar or on your toolbar. So it's just this rectangle, and you're going to click and drag and draw a rectangle like that. And you know that it is a shape layer when you see this little rectangle on the bottom right corner. So what makes the shape tool different is it makes vector shapes. And both of those are questions that are on the certification exam. And I'm going to show you how to make the shape. And when you have the shape tool, all the parameters for adjusting it are up here at the top control strip in Photoshop. So you can make the edits there, and I will walk you through that in a minute. So the first thing we're going to do is make a rectangle, and let's fill it. So let me go into Photoshop. I have this document started here, and I'm going to get the rectangle tool and just draw a rectangle. So if you go up to the very top control strip, so look up here just under the menu, you see it has the shape that I've chosen, and make sure that it says shape. You know, it might come out defaulting on path or pixels. Make sure that you have it on shape. And here's where you can fill everything and adjust the parameters. So I want the stroke there not to be a stroke. So I'm going to click on stroke and click this little white box with the red line so that I have no stroke or outline. And then I want to fill it with a color. So when you click the fill box, this is the window that comes up. It will show you some recently used colors. It also has all these samples already made for you, these swatches you can choose from. And you can even click on the color picker right there and choose colors from there. So on this first rectangle that you make, I want you to fill it with a dark gray. This is going to be a frame for a window. So that is how you're going to draw your first shape, is a dark gray rectangle. And then notice over here on your layers tab on the right, it made a layer just by clicking and dragging on the shape tool. It will make a new layer. So you don't need to create new layers each time you make a new shape. When you create a new shape, it will automatically make a new layer. All right, now that we've drawn one rectangle and filled it with a solid color, I want to show you how to draw another one and fill it with a gradient. So let's go into Photoshop. So you see our first layer here with our first shape. Another way you can draw a shape besides clicking and dragging is just if you click anywhere on your artboard with the tool, you can actually put in like exactly what size you want it to be. So I'll go ahead and leave it like that. That was the last size I used. You can even round the corners and stuff from there. So I think on the certification test, it asks you to create a shape this way by putting in exact numbers, and it tells you to round the corners and click from center. So keep that in mind. So let's go ahead and just make this shape here. And to move it, I'm going to get the move tool and drag it over here next to this other one. And you'll see it made another layer. So if I wanted to select the first rectangle, you just click on the layer and it automatically selects the shape on that layer. All right, let's fill it with a gradient. So I'm going to go back to my shape tool so that the control strip at the top will give me the parameters I need. And I'm going to click on fill. And this time I'm going to go in the third box to make a gradient. See how it fades from black to white there? I'm going to click on that, and it filled it with a gradient. Now you can choose from any of the presets that are already in here by opening the folder and clicking on any of those. However, I want to show you how to do a custom gradient. And for the windows that we're making, I'm going to have the first window fade from like black to blue in the middle and then black again. So let's get started with that. So these squares here at the bottom, they're called color stops, all right? And that is another thing that's on the certification test. They want you to know that the color stops are at the bottom of the gradient, and that's where you can change the colors. These things at the top, they're opacity stops. We are not going to use those right now. So let's go ahead and click on this color stop here. I double clicked on it and it gives me a color picker, and I want this to be black. So I'm gonna draw that there. All right, so I want a color in the middle. I want it to fade from black to dark blue to black. So wherever I want to add a color, I just click right below the right below that bar, and it makes a new color stop. And then I can do the same thing where I double click inside of it, and sometimes it's a little tricky and it doesn't want you to um, select it, but if you wait for the arrow and click there, it'll let you get the color picker. And all right, so I want this to be like a dark blue color, so something like that, and say okay. Now if I want to move the blend, I can just grab that and slide it however I want. If I want the color to be blended a little bit tighter, I can slide these little diamond shapes in, and that makes the gradient, you know, a little bit more abrupt. And if you accidentally click and you have extra stops that you don't want, all you got to do is click and pull down and you can make them go away. All right, and then down here at the bottom, it lets you choose between a linear, radial, angle, reflected, all these different things. But then we're going to change the angle of the blend by just rotating this little clock thing. So on this one, I want you to rotate it so it looks kind of like it's at this angle like that. All right, so we're going to draw the next rectangle for the other window for when the lights are on in a building. So let's click on the first one and kind of move some of these out of the way. Remember, all you have to do is click on the layer to select it, and all you have to do to make a new layer with a rectangle is either click on the artboard or click and drag, and it will make a new layer and it'll fill it with the same color that you used the time before. So we want to change the color of this one though. So we're going to go over, click on the rectangle tool, click on the fill, and then we're going to edit this gradient here. So I want this color here. I'm going to double click on that, and you're going to pick kind of a yellowy color, maybe something like that, and then double click on the black. It's a little tricky to sometimes get it to select color. There we go. You got to get right in the middle of that box and pick white. And then over here, we want to pick kind of a yellowy orange color for that. All right, so that'll look more like a window where the lights are on. All right, in this part of the video, I'll show you how to make some shapes that have like textures in them. Like for this one, I had concrete, and this one I had some brick. So let me show you how to do that. So the first thing you need to do to make these patterns, to make custom ones, is to find some things online that are called tileable and seamless texture images. The reason why they need to be seamless and for tiling is so that when you repeat the pattern, because what it'll do, it'll just fill it with copies of these patterns, and if they're not seamless, you'll see, like you can kind of see in this one how there's a shadow and how there's lines there, so it really won't look, there'll be seams basically. So that's why you need to try to find some that are seamless. So you might have to experiment a little bit to find some that work well, but I have a couple picked out, and let's go ahead and try them out. So I want to fill a rectangle shape with this brick texture that I have. So in order to do that, I am just going to go to Window and make sure that you have patterns open, and I do. I have patterns over here on my tabs. So on the pattern tab, I'm going to click this plus, and it will name it whatever the name of my file is. So it says lightbrick.jpg, and boom, it's there. And I'm going to go ahead and make this concrete one too. I have another image that I want to make a pattern with. You just click plus on the pattern tab and it automatically saves it in there. There's some preset ones that are in here as well, but I'm going to make some of my own custom ones. All right, let's go into our file that we're working on, and once again we're going to make some more shapes. I'm going to go ahead and just make that one down here, and I'm going to fill it with the pattern. So to do that, it's very easy. Once again, you just go up here where it says fill and click on that, and this is where we had gradients, right? This right here is where we can find patterns. So it will fill it with one of these automatically, the ones that are given to you in Photoshop. But I am going to click on one of my own patterns that I just made like that. And the cool thing about it is you can scale it. So let's say that you want the bricks to look smaller. All you got to do is pull that scale down and you can make your pattern smaller. All right, let's make one more rectangle that we're going to use in the buildings drawing, and click fill, and I'm going to click on the concrete, and once again I'm going to scale that down so that the pattern is a little bit smaller. If you make it too small, it looks kind of weird too, but like obviously you don't want it really big, so somewhere around there will look fine for this building. Okay, so now we have all the parts that we need to make the drawing of the city. So basically all you can do is you just use these as building blocks to make everything. So I'm going to go ahead and assemble some of these patterns together to start making windows. So now I will show you how to assemble some of the pieces that we just made, these rectangles, into doing like these first two windows here. So I'm using this gray rectangle as kind of the frame around the window, and this is going to be the piece of glass that sits inside of it. So I want to put that one in there and just make it a little bit smaller. You do not need to use Control T to transform when you're using shapes. They're very easily editable. They might scale to they might change shape to scale, and you might want to maybe, like in this case, maybe make it longer. And if you drag it longer, it's making it wider. If you just hold the Shift key, it will let you change the length without changing the width. All right, so I want my glass to fit just inside the frame like that. And I want to make another copy of that gray rectangle. Just do Control J and then get the Move tool and move it over here because I want to make some windows that have light to them. So I am going to copy that lit window there, and once again I'm going to hold the Shift key so that I can scale it disproportionately and fit in there. So there's two windows, but if you look back at my slides, I have these bars going between them. So to do that, it's very easy. I'm going to click on one of the gray rectangles so that when I make a new rectangle, it'll come out just like that one. Go over here to my shape tool, and I'm just going to draw rectangles that fit in the center. And let's see, I want this to be on top of the other ones. And then I have two more of these bars going horizontally. So if you want to change the position of them, you can just click on the layer, get the Move tool, and I'm going to use my arrow keys on my keyboard just to bump them into place. Go back to my Layers tab, so that I select it and bump that into place. And I want all three of these layers here that I just made to kind of cover up the window. I'm going to group those, and I'll name it over here bars, and I want to copy and paste it so it goes on top of the lit window too. So I am going to click on that and do Control J, and now I have another copy of my bars. Do Control T, and just slide those over on top of that window as well. So once you get to this part with it, let's go ahead and make a windowsill on the bottom of these windows. I'm going to turn off my brick texture there and go to the concrete texture and get my Move tool and slide this over here. And if you're trying to change the shape and it's staying proportional like that, and you want it to be a different shape, all you got to do is hold your Shift key. Then it will let you change the size of it without staying in proportion. So I just make a windowsill, something like that. And let's copy that one, Control J. Whoops, Control J. Click on my layer, I guess, Control J, and then Control T, and move this over. All right, so now we have two windows, one that has the light on and one that doesn't. The next thing you should definitely do is group these layers together, because once you have a group that has your, each window in a group, you can move really fastly when you start to put them on the side of your building. So let's rearrange our layers. So the bars, this is the bars for the blue window. So I'm going to pull this down here, and this is the windowsill for the blue layer. And this is the window frame for the blue layer. So I have this, and whoops, not that. This all makes up my first window. So I'm going to do Control G, and I'll call that dark window. Please don't skip this step. It's going to make your life difficult when you're illustrating the building if you don't group everything like this. Let's get our bricks out of the way. We don't want that in the group. So we want this windowsill, these bars, the light window, and the light frame, and do Control G, and we'll call this light window. All right, now when we are making our building and we want to, copy and paste the windows on it, they're in their own folder. So please do not skip this part. It will make, building this building a lot easier. Continue making the building. This is the same brick that I used to make my building, so it will look like the other one when I'm done. So we need to make it bigger, and you'll see that right now it's scaling the object proportionally, and I want it to be longer. So I'm going to hold the Shift key and drag down and make my building taller. And then on the top of my building, I kind of had this concrete little ridge on the top roof. So I'm going to click that pattern there, and I want to scale that pattern a little bit. So I'm going to go where it says fill and maybe put that at 25. And I want to put like a little bit of a layer style on it to give it a shadow. So I'm going to put a drop shadow on it. And let's go ahead and start pasting in some windows. So the windows need to go on top. So I'm going to click on the layers, pull those on top, and we obviously need to make them smaller and start copying and paste them all over the side of this building. So I'm going to Shift click to get both of them and do Control T and get the move tool actually, and let's move them over here on top, and I want to make them smaller. Oops, something like that, and start spacing them out on the building. Let me go ahead and just get the light window and scoot it over. I'm using my arrow keys on my keyboard to scoot it over a little bit, and I want to duplicate that light window. Control J, and Control T, and move it over, and I'll do one more light window. Control J, Control J, and Control T, and space it evenly. And then I want to collect all four of those, and I'm on the move tool up here, so I can just use my arrow keys to nudge them around how I want. All right, that looks pretty good. I want to make another copy of all of those. So what you can do is Shift click to get all four of them, do Control G to group it in one group. So I can just call this one top row, and then do Control J to duplicate it. We'll call this second row, and do Control T and move this down here like so. And to make it interesting, you should probably, let me move it up a little bit more, you should probably mix up the order of, dark windows and light windows. So you can move them around. Like, let's say I'm going to get rid of maybe that light window. Actually, let me get rid of that light window. I'm going to copy a dark window instead. So I turned off one of the light windows. I'm going to take the dark window and do Control J and, whoops, click, let me do that again. Click on the dark window, Control J to duplicate it, Control T, and slide it over. I'm going to hold the Shift key to keep it straight. All right, that way it looks a little more interesting to have some of them on and some of them off. And let's go ahead and duplicate that row now. So click on second row, do Control J to duplicate it. Let's name this third row. Do Control T and hold the Shift key and slide it down like that. All right, and once again, you can mix up the windows so that some of different ones are on and off. I wouldn't do it exactly like that, but for the purpose of making this video, I'm not going to do that. I want to shrink up my windows a little bit more though, so I'm going to hold the Shift key and get all of them, and I'm going to hold the Shift key again and just kind of squish them up because I want to have some room on the bottom to have like some graffiti and stuff on my wall. So I'm just holding the Shift key and pulling those up. And then the last thing I want to do to all these windows is put them in a folder again. So do Control G. Oops, let me get out of the transform mode. Control G, and we'll just call this all windows. So now I have that all in one group. And then I'm going to add some layer blending options on here. I'm going to add a bevel and emboss. So you can experiment with this. I had already have this set up. If you want to copy my settings, you can take like a little screenshot of how that looks if you want to copy it, but it doesn't have to be exactly like that. And I'm going to add a little bit of a drop shadow, and this makes it look more realistic. So now I'm going to show you how I got graffiti on my building. So I just went to Pixabay and searched that, and I found this picture of graffiti, and I copied that to my clipboard. And we'll go over here to my Photoshop file and do Control V. I got my rectangle tool and I just, whoops, selected the very bottom of that and pressed delete or backspace on my keyboard to get rid of it. And then I'm going to do Control D to deselect it. And I got my eraser tool and I got a big brush with a soft blend on it. Let me do Control T and move this actually down on top of my building before I use the eraser. And let me scale it on my building like that. Press the check mark. I put the layer blending mode on something like that, maybe multiply. And then I got my eraser. I'm going to make the brush a little smaller. That's kind of a little bit too big. And then I just erased that dark part that was at the top. Alright, so that's how I got graffiti on there. Let me show you how I did the light post. Once again, I also got that in Pixabay. So I'm going to right click this image, copy image, paste it in there, do Control T to make it smaller. I'm going to put it in front of the building. It had a bit of a white edge on it, so I went to Effects and I did a black stroke on it. I made this position on the center and I made it 2 pixels and said OK. And then of course, let me go to my finished file. I made this light come out of it by just making a new layer. Let's name our layer lamp here. I like to name all my layers so that you know, it's more organized. Oops. Pull that down there with the building. This is all my building stuff here. And let's go back to lamp. So, oops, I spelled windows wrong. I'm going to go to my lamp layer and make a new layer here. And this is going to be like the light that's coming out of it. So I need to pick like a yellow color and get your brush tool and just make a big soft brush like that and just go boop right on top of it. I actually put that below. Whoa, that does not look good. I actually put that below my lamp. So let's help pull the lamp up on top like that. And then I made one more layer actually on top of it and made a white glow that was just a little bit smaller like that. So that's how I made my light. So before I do the next part, I want to keep my file organized by holding the Shift key and getting these last 3 layers I made with the lamp and the glow and doing Control G. and grouping them. I'm a big believer in keeping your files organized. It makes your life a lot easier. Go ahead and group those into, whoops, building 1. I can even drop my window inside there. Now I have my building all in one folder, so when I start building the other things in my scene, it's a lot less complicated. So one of my favorite features in Photoshop is the tree rendering. It is a really cool thing that a lot of people don't know about in Photoshop. So what you need to do to make this tree rendering thing work is to make a new layer. Okay, so make sure you have a new layer. It needs a new layer, otherwise it'll try to put it inside one of your other layers. So we make a new layer. You can go ahead and call that tree. And the other important thing to do is to turn off the other layers that you have. If you don't turn off those other layers, it's going to make square trees, which is very strange. So we just want this tree layer on by itself, and we're going to go to Filter, Render, and choose Tree. And it lets you pick what kind of tree you want. So you can have like a pine tree, you can have these cherry blossom trees. It is very, very cool. So choose any kind of tree you want. It lets you choose the light direction, the amount of leaves that you have on it. It is really crazy how much detail you can go into customizing it. I'm just going to leave it on this tree right here for now and say OK. And voila, I have a tree. Now I can turn on my other things and go back to my tree layer. I'm going to do Control T and make it smaller, set it down on the ground right here. And I'm actually going to flip it because the light source is over here and my lamp is over there. So you can just go Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal. That looks a little more realistic. And then the very last thing I want to show you is how to do these adjustment layers to totally change the coloring and look of your whole drawing. So let's go back to the piece of art that we're kind of following. As far as the background goes, you can copy in your last assignment where you made the city skyline in there, or you can just make a new one by making shapes. Those are all really basic shapes filled with black with little windows. Let me show you how I colorize this to, kind of fit that nighttime aesthetic. So let's go back to Photoshop. What you do, these are called adjustment layers. You want to click on top of your artboard so that these go on top of everything. And click this little icon right here. Or is it? Yeah, right there. And let's try the levels one first. So let's click on levels. And then under properties, it gives you this slider where you can change things. So I want it to look darker. So I'm going to pull like all those mid-tones really far out to the right. And let's add another one. Click here and maybe go to, let's try something like gradient. You can even add a gradient fill on top of everything. So maybe we'll make like this color, say OK. And you can treat it like a layer blending mode. So you could say something like multiply or lighten or screen. These are really weird. I don't think I'm going to keep any of them, but you're welcome to try and experiment with them. You can even just lower the opacity on it if you want it to be more of a subtle thing, but you can totally change the color of your art just with these adjustment layers. And you can still edit it further. Like if I want to click that, maybe I don't like the pink and purple, maybe you want to try that. So you can change the gradient after you do it. These are called non-destructive edits. They let you change things about the look of your art non-permanently. It's not destroying it. It's something that you can keep editing and have control over. If you don't like it, you can turn it off, and go back to the original, and you can keep adding more and more of them and stacking them on top of each other. As far as the sign goes, I just found that on Pixabay. I copied and pasted on there and put an outer glow on it. And I'm not going to show you how I made this building because I think you get the gist of how I did it. You're just making a rectangle, filling it with a concrete texture. This is another rectangle I had, and I filled it with this glass block texture. I did my typing over here of the name of that place, and I just lowered the opacity of that layer. The door was also a rectangle, and I did a pattern fill with some wood planks. Once again, this was copied out of Pixabay, and I put the layer blending mode just on screen or lighten or something like that so it would show up, and I painted a little bit of a blue glow behind it. This was also a graphic I found online, and I put the layer blending mode so that you could see the concrete through it. This here was just a photo I found on Pixabay of a dark room with a light floor, and I just pasted it on there to look like it was going inside. So that is all I'm going to show you for this assignment. I think that I want you to figure out the rest of this on your own. I gave you a foundation for knowing how to draw shapes and make it into a building and do some effects, and I want you to put like your own spin on the rest of the piece of art.